Hey guys, what's up? Threads13 here for deucescrack.com, coming to you today with another Ask Threads13. Again, this one is based on a thread that kind of got me thinking about this stuff, asking about how beatable the micros are today. So again, this is another one in sort of the series within the series, things you aren't doing to beat the micros. And this one I'm entitling Overrating Your Good Hands. And this is something I see a lot, and it's kind of it's a little funny to describe how it's happening. It's not in a way that I see a lot of guys at the micro likes. A lot of you guys who are on the forums are pretty smart about not stacking off in bad situations and things like that. But I mean it in more sort of nuanced ways. I mean it usually more earlier in the hands where you actually get yourself into these situations that you needn't because you are overvaluing your hands. You're probably getting tired of me hearing this. That's not how I intended that to come out. You're probably getting tired of hearing this. And I'm going to keep saying it though, but it's all about board texture in these situations, and really all situations. And I'm just going to keep saying it and saying it. And the board texture tells you a lot, and it's going to tell you, a lot about the strength of your hand as well. So use the board texture, and it's going to, we're going to look at the board texture, and we want to look at the that texture and how it hits our opponent's range. And that'll help us in one way get an idea about the strength of our hand. But we also want to look ahead into the future and think about what sort of turn cards and river cards can come out, and how that will affect the strength of our hand. And we want to consider how our opponent is going to respond to our different actions, whether that be betting, whether that be checking, and how that is going to change the strength of our hand. So, I mean, this is going to be the case unless you get the nuts. If you bet and get called, your hand value does go down because you get your opponent to fold his weaker hands. It's not as good as it used to be. So that's certainly something that you want to think about in these sort of situations. So sort of symptoms include, is when your thinking's just going, I have top pair, so I bet. Now a lot of times that you have top pair, you probably should bet, but that you shouldn't just go, we top pair bet. You should take it, and think harder about it than that. And another one is just, I gotta get value. And I kind of made fun of this in my last video that was based on small bet sizing, where a lot of times there's kind of, like I said, kind of been an obsession by poker players. You know, I got to get value, got to get value, got to get value. And you could probably turn it into some sort of really lame white boy rap song. So, at least that's what it sounded like what I just did it there. But what you want to realize is that you don't want to quote unquote get value. You just want to do whatever is the most profitable in the long run. And value's a conceptual term for helping us think about that. But yeah, sometimes you might get value quote unquote by betting, but that doesn't mean that betting is necessarily the highest EV play. So what I've done, kind of keeping along with the theme of this series, we'll have our little introduction here, and we'll jump into just a couple examples this time. I think the examples might be a little bit harder to grasp, because everybody bets all the time. So I kind of want to talk about them a little bit more. So let's go ahead and let's jump in. Okay, so here's the first example I want to look at is this board texture here. When hero raises in early position, tag calls on the button, and the flop comes out King of Hearts, Nine of Clubs, Four of Spades. So in, the tradition of watching a video with me, you get to deal with some combinator, and we're going to take a look at how that hits some ranges. And I mean, this is really how I study poker hands a ton. Is, opening up combinator and similar tools and digging in and just seeing how ranges hit different board textures and then kind of starting to come up with some strategies that way. And so I highly recommend that you guys, kind of, take this as a, if I'm doing this so much, then it's an indication of how important I think it is. So I really suggest that you guys start thinking about doing some stuff like this when you're studying poker. It isn't easy, but it really goes a long way towards making you a better poker player. Is just really just understanding how different board textures work and how you want to build a strategy. And really the board texture is going to pretty much tell you the strategy that you want to use. So this texture here, King 9-4, pretty dry. There's some gutters between the King and the 9 that people will play, but that's about it. And people will play some Kings, and not really that many 9s. What I've done here on Combinator, is I've put in, what I think sort of hands that we can expect, a tag to call us on the button. So I've taken out the Queens and the Ace King. I could put those in a little bit, but that's not really going to change the results here a whole bunch for us. And I've put in these things like 10-9 suited, 9-8 suited, 8-7 suited through 6-5 suited. You can see these little red things here, and that's because they're weighted at like 30%, I believe. Yeah. And the Jack 9 suited through the 8-6 suited, I've weighted those at 10%. And same thing for the suited aces. So I think the suited one gappers and the suited aces, people don't really call on the button a whole bunch. But I went ahead and put them in there so that they're not totally removed. So now we can go to post flop mode. And so what I've done here is I've just selected the sort of hands that I think he will call us with on the flop. And so he's going to call us with any king. Any set, of course, and really we could just say continue. That kind of just gets the point across. Any 9, jacks and 10s, and these gut shots. We might make a case that maybe he calls us with like ace queen also. Kind of forgot about that, so let's go ahead and we will put that in here too. Now that's one of those, he may not call with ace queen all the time, but maybe he also calls with ace jack sometimes. So I think by just putting all the ace queen in, I think that does a good enough job. I could weight it and stuff, but for sake of not boring you guys with doing things like that, I'll go ahead and skip it. So what I'm going to do down here, well, let's note one thing here first, is first off, our opponent's going to fold the flop a lot regardless of our hand, with this sort of strategy. So that already kind of should tell us is that, well, if I've got a good hand, I'm going to get a lot of folds. And I mean, if we go back to this, let's get value, let's get value, let's get value, you can't get value for folding, right? So that's a little bit of a problem, but let's go ahead and the hand I want to talk about here is, let's talk about king of diamonds, 10 of diamonds, and put that in. And as you can see, if you look at the ungrouped here, sorry, I bumped stuff, made the microphone make loud noises. If you look at this here, and highlighter took it away, as you can see now, he's folding about 56% of the time. So now you're getting quite a bit of folds, on the flop in this sort of situation. And so, you know, are you getting value? Well, that's where we can look down here in the bottom left, and we can look at this group, this 68.4. And this is where I think guys get a little simplistic with this stuff. Is they go, value is when I have equity greater than 50%. Woohoo, I got value. And that's true when you're betting the river if you know your opponent's strategy and you're all in. So, or not necessarily you're all in, but your opponent will never raise. Sure, that's true. But that's not the case here. We're not on the river. We don't know our opponent's strategy. Now we're assuming that we know it with the assumptions that I make. So lots of use of the word assume. Sorry. So we're assuming that kind of stuff. But this equity number doesn't tell us how the turn in the river is going to play out. And this is what I mean about looking into future streets here. And if you think about it, if you bet the turn on a brick, which is most cards on the turn, so you know we're talking really about eights through twos are really the brick cards. So if we do that, we can go ahead and let's just say it is the old two of clubs. Yeah, I mean, let's actually make it the complete brick so it's a little easier to see. Hearts, clubs, spades, so that'll be a diamond. Cool. So he doesn't turn a flush draw. And so now what we're gonna probably see here is our opponent folding his gutters and his ace highs. Probably gonna get him fold his middle pairs in this situation. And I mean, jacks and tens usually fold here. Even if let's just take one of them out, we're very quickly going to have trouble as future streets come down. If we put a bet in, if we just bet the turn, now the money is going in behind real fast. And the turn bet's more important than the flop bet because it's like 2-3 times bigger. I mean, if you see bet, say there's 6 BB, you raise 3 BB pre-flop. Let's write it over here so we can see it. So say we raise, oops, not on the home row. Try again. Raise 3 BB pre-flop. So now the flop is pot equals 6 BB. We see bet 4. So villain calls. So now there is going to be 14 BB in the pot on the turn. So if we see bet, say 10, you can see it's like 2.5 times bigger. So, I mean, you're now getting into a situation where as more and more money goes into the pot, now you're not very happy. So now you could just check the turn. And it'll probably go something like this. Maybe your opponent bets his gut shots, checks his middle pairs. But you can see now we're going, you're just coin flipping. So you're just getting yourself in situations where now let's say you you call the turn and your opponent bets the river. Now's the real pain, is that river bet is very big and you call it and you're pretty much going to be behind, assuming your opponent's not doing anything wacky with his strategy here. And I'm trying to assume that he's not just like floating the flop super wide and stuff like that. If we knew that, then we'd be talking about an entirely different game. I want to talk about the situation where our opponent is playing at least, not like with a chicken with his head cut off, If we have a read that our opponent's floating every flop under the sun, then we have a different discussion. But let's talk about, situations where people are playing, relatively straightforward, which I think is a lot more interesting. So you can see that as more money goes into this pot, it's hard for the money to get to go in good for you. So it kind of starts becoming, why are we betting this flop, setting ourselves up for a situation where we don't want any more money to go in. It's just not going to be good, and this has to do a lot of the issue is, we're out of position. And we can't control when the money goes in and when it doesn't. But a lot of it also has to do is, there's just not very many hands that when the second, and or third bet goes in, there's not very many hands that want to put it in against you that you're happy about being against. It's basically just gutters, when you start by betting the flop. So, and then the problem with gutters, of course, is that, they can hit, and make the nuts, and then you're in a lot of pain there too. So it's not really a good situation for you there. So that's what we want to think about here is don't just go like, I've got king 10. I can get called by a 9, so therefore I bet. Yes, you can get called by a 9, but think ahead to the future, and think about future streets and how that money goes in. Because since the money is so much bigger, and if we go ahead and we kind of carry this thought all the way to the river, if we bet 10 on the turn and our opponent calls, it'll be 34 in the river pot. So I mean, river bets could be somewhere in the 20 to 30 range. I mean, now we're getting into look at this bet size here as compared to your flop bet size. Look at this bet size here as compared to your flop bet size. Now they don't happen all the time, but the thing is we're talking about 30 to 40 BB as compared to 4. So, I mean, yikes, a lot bigger. you know, I mean, 7 to 10 times bigger, yeah. So, I mean, we've got a 7.5 to 10 times bigger. So we got some issues, going here. Is that the money on the future street's just so much bigger, and it tends to not go in good for us after we bet the flop. And I think that's the main thing to kind of see with this hand is that, you raised under the gun and he called and the flop came king high and, you've got a weak king. You're playing versus a tight player. He's not going to go crazy putting in a whole bunch of money in that sort of situation. At least you can't count on it. Often enough for you to start trying to build the pot. And that's basically what we're doing by c-betting the flop here with the king 10, is we're trying to build the pot for later. You don't want to build the pot for later right now. You want to keep the pot smaller, actually. If the pot gets bigger later, you're going, no, I wish the pot was smaller. You're crying, and then you post a thread in the forum saying, okay, I bet the flop, I check called the turn, I checked the river, what do I do? I bet the flop, I bet the turn, and what do I do on the river? So like you guys have probably played hands that way before. And it's not that, either time, what do I do on the turn? What do I do on the river? The problem happened on the flop just by betting it here with the king 10. And we actually went to check. So, and this is a great example of what I was saying where, a lot of people just go, I have top pair, so bet. It's not a great situation for you to bet top pair. Just check. And another thing that kind of just came to my brain is a lot of times people go, well, I need to protect versus his overcards and his gut shots. Well, he's going to bet those when you check. So you don't have to protect. So you don't have to protect when your opponent's going to do it for you. If he's going to bet when you check, then you don't have to bet. So, I mean, the whole thing is like, I got to make sure a bet goes in so he doesn't get a free card. That's really what you're saying, but he's going to put a bet in. So he's not going to get a free card. And it doesn't really matter who did the betting as long as the bet went in. So that's A. B is when we're talking about protecting our hand, what we really want to realize is what we mean is like we're protecting our equity in the pot. And by doing that, you risk portions of your stack. So you're saying, I'm going to risk a portion of my stack to protect my equity in my pot. That's what you're saying when you say, let's protect our hand. So you're just saying, let's protect our hand because it's shorter and easier to say. So that's the thing, though. When you have king 10, as we can see, your equity, I mean, even on when we went to the flop and we put his nines back in and his ace queen, go back to the flop, your equity's good, 68%, but it's not 90, and as the hand goes on, as we've seen, now your equity starts going down. So what's actually happening is, why do we need to protect our hand that isn't really that good? So, protection, it can end up being a big issue. So what happens is we're maybe putting 30 to 40 BB in with our hand to 30, 40 BB, like a third of your stack, to protect a hand that's mediocre. And that's a lot of money to put in to protect something that's very mediocre. So, and like we said, it'll get protected for us. So, so there's not really a whole bunch of need. A lot of times people just bet when you check. So even with like 7-7, they sometimes just bet when you check. Again, not condoning it, but it happens. Um, so this is a good example where we just can't just go, I have top pair, so therefore it's a bet. Got to get value, got to protect. Um, nah, it's not like you really just got to look at the board texture and you got to think about what's gonna happen in the rest of the hand. So, okay, I think that's good enough on that one. Let's take a look at our second example. Hey guys, so here is another example I want to take a look at. This one is again talking about situations where people can overvalue their hands. And this one is a little different. We're going to open in the cutoff and get called again by the button and a tag. And we're going to be looking at a similar range here. What I've done with his range is I've increased the frequencies that he has these hands with. And you could make a case for putting like some ace 10 and king jacks in there too, but I don't really think it's a big deal. I think his calling range will be very similar. So I just really, now I have them calling with these hands. I think the 9-7 suited got cut out. So I got just getting him calling with these hands just a little bit more frequently. So let's go ahead and get this 9-7 suited in there. Let's see. I'm just going to make sure I'm being consistent here. Yeah, I mean, 10% is okay. That really doesn't matter a whole bunch. So, okay. So, 9-7 goes ahead and calls it football time. So, cool. Okay. So here's another situation that we have, where we want to think about what's going on here. And so you see, this is another flop where your opponent's folding a decent chunk at a time. So it's going to be another hand that is kind of hard for you to quote unquote get value. And one hand that I want to take a look at here, is something like say 10-10. So say 10 of spades, 10 of diamonds. And let's see what sort of equity we have here. And talk about how a board texture like this, which is, drier, or other word, wetter, than the previous board. The King 9-4 was, King 9-4 rainbow was pretty darn dry. Now we have a Jack 8-5 two-tone, whereas pretty wet. We got all sorts of straight draws and things like that come out there. Now our opponent doesn't really have a lot of those straight draws, and this situation because of our assumptions about his pre-flop play, but they exist. And as you can see now, when you bet the flop and get called, we're in much worse shape here with this 10-10. Is we have 36. I mean, in the previous hand we had almost twice as much equity. And the problem that we're going to have in this situation is that so many turn cards are going to be an issue for us. Of course, you got the obvious stuff like the clubs. And when you don't have a club, that's a real problem. And so, but you also got the aces and the kings and the queens. And you also have actually the spades. The spades aren't very good either because now if the river clubs comes a club or a spade, which will be about half the deck. Now you're going to feel pain on those river cards too if your opponent happens to bet whether to turn checks to or not. It just gets a little bit grosser. So just devalues your hands. Of course, when flushes come in and you have middle pair, you tend to not like your hand so much. Just more hands that beat you. So, I mean, if we look at it and we say, there's going to be like 10 clubs and 10 spades and aces through queens that, there's only 2 of each that are non-club, non-spades, so 6 of that. I mean, we're up to 26 turn cards, out of like the 45 in the deck, right? So we're already going to have, 47 in the deck. I mean, we're already about half of the turn cards are giving us some problems. Now, there's a little bit of the 10 of clubs is kind of okay right now. And the 10 of spades is in our hand. So that kind of removes the cards. There's I'm not trying to get super intense on the counting of the cards here. But other cards that are kind of sneaky not good are things like a 4, 7, 7, 6 gets there on a 4. An 8 isn't the world's best card because if you happen to be ahead versus an 8, now you're behind. Um, Nines are kind of the mixed bag. They're okay. They give you an open-ended straight draw, so help you out some there. But Queen 10 gets there, and 7, 6 gets there. So, it kind of goes a little bit both ways. And we talked about sevens, sixes, 9, 7 gets there. 6, 5 makes two pair if it was hanging around there, which it could be if it had 6, 5 of clubs. Granted, only one combo. Um, so so there's all these sort of issues, and you can see, I mean, there's just a lot of turns that you don't like. And so what happens is it's very hard to dodge the turn and the river. So let's say you've got like a 40% chance of dodging the turn. So what is your probability of dodging the turn and dodging the river? Let's say, by our sort of little, this isn't super math or anything, but just to conceptually kind of get an idea of the strength of your hand, outside of just looking at the equity, is that if we're going to go with this sort of dodge the turn number, which I admit, like, I wholeheartedly admit is not like great math. I'm just trying to put this out as a number for you guys to kind of latch onto to conceptually get what's going to happen on the future streets. Is dodging the turns 40%, dodging the rivers 40% roughly too, if you happen to dodge the turn. So the probability of going dodge would be 40% times 40%, so 16%. That's not a lot, right? That's not a lot of good things going on. And there's only one turn card that makes you quite happy, is catching a non-club 10, which is what the 10 of hearts. That's pretty nice card, you're really not worried about too much on that sort of card there. So this is a spot where I do see sometimes people just bet, and I think it's a little suicidal. One, when you get called, I mean, a lot of times you're just up versus a jack, as we can see. I mean, and even if you're not up versus a jack, you can easily be up versus some sort of flush draw that has like a ton of equity against you. And it's just so hard to do anything moving forward on the future streets. I mean, you're just going to have to end up losing the hand. You're going to catch bad cards. It's one of those things where a lot of times people get pretty concerned about protecting here. And again, this is another one of those where you're protecting against what? I mean, you're gonna lose, versus the very hands that you're trying to protect against are probably, I guess, the flush draws. But the flush draws are like coin flipping against you, and then when they don't hit, like they can catch cards that you have to check fold on anyways. So for the most part, all you're doing is putting money in against hands that you're going to lose to. I mean, that doesn't sound like protecting. That sounds like value betting yourself, if you want to call it something. So don't think in terms of just what is my showdown value right now. Like, and even when we look at that, it's not very good. A lot of times it's easy to fall into the trap of just looking at your equity and saying, my equity is okay, so I should bet. Or another trap is worse hands can call, so I should bet. Well, what percentage of the time is a worse hand calling? And we can't just call things worse hands and hold them. It's much more complicated than that. That's the thing. If a guy has 9-7 right now, yeah, it's the worst hand. But what runouts are going to come that you actually win? I mean, a 10's obviously not good. If an ace, a king, or a queen comes, I'm guessing you're check folding. If a 4 comes, I guess you check fold. I mean, what are we hoping for here? A 9's okay. A 9 we might end up check calling on, I guess. I wouldn't bet the flop, so that's what I mean by I guess. so I don't get myself in this spot and think about it too hard. Um, so, I mean, I guess you're hoping for a nine. So, and he's got one, so you're hoping for one of the three nines. Like we said, a ten's no good because he just made straight. It's not horrible, but you're going to lose the hand a lot. So, I mean, you basically could say you have about three outs versus him is a more accurate way of looking at that situation. Because unless you catch that card, you lose. I don't think you can even check call on like a two because there's, again, now what are you hoping for? A two or a three again on the river? Uh, you're going to lose if he bets there. So you don't have the best hand if you've got three outs, you know. He doesn't have eight outs to hit a straight. He has 44 outs because he's got all the outs besides hitting a nine. So, such that you can check call the turn and then maybe he just ends up giving up on the river. So, and even then you might get blown off your hand on the river. So I think that's a more accurate way of looking at the hand. Now I started here with showing you guys what 10-10 looks like. But really everything I just said would be just as true if I give you this hand. Jack of diamonds, 10 of diamonds. Wait for it. Now your equity is a little bit better. So, and that's because when you bet the flop and you get called, you're up versus jacks less, because you block them. And you're going to get a few more folds on the flop. And you're, going to therefore be up maybe versus, you're going to be up versus tens more often, right? Because you don't block those as much. Yeah. That's about it. Other than that, you run into all the same problems. You run into all the same issues here. So this is just one of those things where we talked about in the last hand example where we said betting the flop and getting called. You're kind of trying to say, hey, I want to build the pot with these sort of hands. And you don't want to build the pot. In fact, moving forward throughout this hand, you're going to be very uncomfortable. So, I mean, we can do much better here by checking and then calling. And a lot of times, actually, what happens here is your opponents are like really, really, really happy to bet because most people at these stakes, when they check the flop, they have nothing. So, because most people are thinking along the lines of what we were talking about of, I got to protect my hand on this wet board texture. So they see a wet board texture, so they go, I got to bet. So what this means is they have a good hand, they bet. And this also means if they have a draw, they'll often bet too. So what do they have when they check? They have nothing. And most of you guys probably already figured that out and bet here a lot. And that's actually fine because most people play that way. So you're right, they are folding. And that's a pretty good strategy. So what happens is if you're picking that strategy, one, you're walking right into the problem of when you check, you get owned pretty easily. But if you actually start checking some good hands, this actually flips around as if people are using that strategy, and they very often are, is they're actually going to own themselves by betting into you because you're not going to be folding all that, at least not nearly as often. I don't want to say you're calling like 60% of the time on the flop because that's certainly not true. But you're not going to be folding 100% anymore. So that's going to really, really devalue the EV of that play. And it allows you to play like Jack 10 versus a much weaker range, instead of just playing it versus like flush draws and gutters on up, and top pair and things. So now your Jack 10 actually plays better for that same bet, because you're going to be playing versus a weaker range. Yes, you have to see the turn more often, but you would rather see the turn all the time and be in good shape than see the turn like half of the time, because he folds about half of the time when you bet. But then when you get called, you're in horrible shape. It's kind of a waste of a good hand. I mean, it's not a great hand, but you can kind of see is like if you're building a pot and then when you get called, you're really unhappy. then why are we betting? And that's especially the case with something like Jack 10, because it's not one of those hands that is going to very often be able to make money on future streets. So therefore, I think checking here with a Jack 10 is a pretty good play too. Now I realize one thing I do want to say before we wrap up today is I realize a lot of this stuff is going to like seem pretty foreign to you guys. Um, and that's okay. I just want to kind of put some thoughts out there of some spots where checking top pair is pretty reasonable. And you can notice that doing it when you're out of position on these wet boards is actually kind of okay. And actually doing it when you've got like a really mediocre top pair on like the ultra dry boards where nobody has anything to call you, unless things go bad for you, is okay also. So those are a couple examples. I'm not saying, check top pair every single time that you get it. No, I'm not saying that. But I am saying, look at the situation and don't just go, I have top pair, so it's going to be a bet. It's just not that simple. And I think that's really a big issue with, you guys playing the micros, is, and I think honestly it goes higher than that, but that's really an issue because, I mean, here we are with, a lot of times some of our better hands, and if we're misplaying some of our better hands, then you can see, that's going to hurt your win rate a lot if you can get you make a good hand and you don't play it right, right? So you can see how that can be an issue. So let me know if you guys have any questions as always. And, hopefully this stuff isn't as clear as mud. And let me know if you guys have any questions in the forums. This has been threads13 for deucescrack.com.